Back to Dragon Dreams. It's been a long time. I've been focusing on a lot of other things in my life, but I'm really happy to get back to this. So, today on Dragon Dreams, I'm going to answer the question, what is a TTRPG? Stay tuned. TTRPGs, in my opinion, are not storytelling games. They have something to do with stories, but I don't think that's quite right. Now, in I had this hiatus in TTRPG playing from 2000 to 2020, and I was shocked to discover when I came back to the hobby during the pandemic that Wizards of the Coast had defined Dungeons and Dragons as a storytelling game, which is really redefining it because that was never what it was being described as in the TSR days of the hobby. So there used to be a distinction, in fact, I remember this from the 90s, between a storytelling game and a TTRPG. So a storytelling game, as I'm familiar with the term, is a gamification of telling a story. So the simplest version, which you may have played at camp or outdoor ed or something like that, I know I did, was, you sit around a fire and one person starts a story and then the next person in the circle, continues it until you get to the last person and they come to the conclusion of a story. That's a storytelling game. Now there's more sophisticated versions of that, and I think they involve things like story points. You get certain amount of story points and you can, influence what happens in the story. And so it's a game about sort of the agency of the player to participate in telling a story. So players are storytellers. But in role-playing games, players actually portray a particular character, and that's very different, in my opinion. I also don't think that TTRPGs are war games either. I think that's a mistake. It is true that TTRPGs came out of wargaming, but they're not actually war games. First of all, because was and is are not the same thing. So just because something has a history doesn't mean it didn't morph into something else that's distinct and that we can tell is a different thing fundamentally. And I think that's kind of self-evident by the fact that there's a lot of other things you do other than just fight, and your mission is not like you're not just like soldiers on some sort of mission that's just, you know, we're having this war and we're fighting. I mean, that could be something you do in a role playing game, but there's so much more to it. It's just kind of self evident, I think, that it's not wargaming. But it is useful to know that history because it really helps you understand why things like Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot have the sort of the tone and the kind of the types of mechanics and so forth that they have. And I think that what's most important in the wargaming aspect is that Dave Arneson actually had this concept that comes from a game called Strategos, which was a game made for the American military in the late 19th century that was meant to train officers in war strategy and battle tactics that included a referee so that you don't just roll dice, you actually have a referee who has a sense of how wars actually work so you can train in real life situations, or train for real life situations rather. And so Dave Arneson adapted that to include the concept of a referee or a game master. That's where that comes from, right? From wargaming, and it makes things very interesting because that's where you get these rulings over rules. So that's an important piece of the history, but it's not a war game because is and was are not the same thing. Is a TTRPG. In my opinion, it's an epic simulation game. No, I don't mean a simulation game that's epic! Yeah! I mean a game that simulates an epic, like the Iliad or the Odyssey, or probably in modern times, more like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. You're not making up an epic together. That would be a storytelling game. It's a game in which players portray epic heroes. Now, when I say hero, I don't necessarily mean to imply that these heroes are moral or ethical or even virtuous. Obviously, I realize people like to play thieves and Han Solo types, and sometimes they like to play bad guys and all that kind of fun stuff, because after all, we're having fun. But hero just meaning protagonists in an epic, not necessarily always the nicest people. Um, but I actually really love it when people do play heroic characters. I think, in my not so humble opinion, TTRPGs are often at their best when you have heroic player characters. So, TTRPGs are games in which players play epic heroes, and it's kind of like, so you think you can slay a dragon. It's kind of like, so have you ever wondered if you were in a situation in which you were called to be an epic hero, would you be able to rise to the challenge? And I think that's one of the things we do in games. Like, games are kind of in between reality and stories. Like, stories are just these sort of static things. You just kind of sit back and you listen and they wash over you, and you kind of go, wow, that was so amazing. Like that, like, Luke Skywalker defeated the Emperor, and, Frodo ended up bringing the ring to Mount Doom, and, didn't actually throw it in because Gollum bit it off his finger, all that kind of stuff, right? But, I mean, the point is that the heroes, save the day, or they vanquish the evil emperor, or they slay the dragon, or whatever, right? But that's just a static thing. Whereas, like, in real life, I mean, it's like, what are epics? I mean, that's kind of hard to answer. I mean, modern times are modern times, and anyway, things never really worked the way they worked in epics. It's kind of a model of heroism and virtue, right? That's related to real life, but in real life, I mean, we have jobs and we have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like, most of us are not actually out there being heroes who save the world, or maybe contributing to the greater good. So it's interesting and fun to a lot of us who like epic stories to kind of go, would we be able to do that? Could I be Luke Skywalker? Could I be Frodo? Could I be Odysseus? Could I get home? Could I slay the dragon? Right? So, the GM takes on the role of the world in which the epic takes place. So it's all of the challenges of the epic heroes is the responsibility of the GM to present. The monsters, the NPCs, but also just, the factions, the people, the other people who may want or not want the heroes to succeed, or may not care, or may have their own agenda. It's everything. It's the world of the epic is the GM's responsibility. And the rules, dice, and most importantly, rulings over rules, because this was the critical thing that makes role-playing games different from every other game, in my opinion, except for these certain kinds of role-playing, of war games, rather, that Dave Arneson discovered, and participated in. But, like, apart from those, role-playing games are one of the few genres of games I can think of that have a game master of this sort. So to me, rulings over rules are actually critical to the definition of a role-playing game. So these things, the rules, the dice, and the rulings over rules made by the GM, determine whether the heroes are successful or fail in their heroic endeavors. So, everything that can challenge the heroes in an epic can challenge PCs in a TTRPG, right? So whether it's Frodo or Luke Skywalker or Saint George or Beowulf or Odysseus, all of those things ought to be able to be things that could exist in a TTRPG to challenge the PCs. That could include things like the maze, the labyrinth. That is a profound, archetypal aspect. Remember when I said that the world of heroics is not exactly the real world? There's sort of a real world sense to it. But if you want it grounded in reality, so you're not just totally flying off into fancy. But there's also some non-realistic parts, and one of those parts is there's almost kind of this phantasmagoria of like this labyrinth that's confusing and befuddling, and you get lost in more ways than one, right? The heroics of the TTRPG can include descent into the depths. So that's a classic concept of like the Mines of Moria or Dante's Inferno, descending down into the depths and discovering what's there in this other world. It could be getting lost in fairyland and reemerging like Thomas the Rhymer. So that's a variant, I think. I think Descent into the Depths and Fairyland are both variants of entering this other world. So there's this world and there's the other world, the world in which the epic takes place. So there's Odysseus as the king of Ithaca with his family, with Penelope and with Telemachus. And then there's the world of trying to get back from the Trojan War and being lost at sea. And one thing that's interesting about the Odyssey is that Odysseus does not come to any civilization until toward the very end of the epic. So he's, wherever he goes, rather than actually finding his fellow Greeks and his fellow human beings, very often what he's finding is a world of cyclopses and a world of witches like Circe, who turn men into pigs and that kind of thing, right? And a world of sea monsters. It can involve defeating monsters, and that's a profound archetype. I mean, it's not just they're not just animals. They're kind of demons to some extent. They're horror creatures. They are the creatures that give us nightmares. They're nightmarish beings that must in some way be defeated, and maybe also challenge the virtues of the hero, so that the hero has to rise to the occasion of being courageous, of being loyal to their society. There's all sorts of things that could be challenged by a monster. It's not just, you kill it. And very often there's, you have to find its weakness, or you have to do something different. You have to trick it in some way. There's lots of different solutions to the problem of the monster. So monsters in heroic epics are not just these simple bad guys, not just simple enemies. Oftentimes there's something more complex about them that the hero has to overcome. And maybe in some cases it's negotiating with the monster. Maybe in some cases you befriend the monster. That's a possibility. But it also doesn't have to be, like, I feel like the pendulum has swung a little bit too much in the nice direction these days, and people want monsters to sort of be misunderstood. And I think there's kind of a mistake to try to make monsters too realistic. Sometimes monsters are just monsters. Why does a Medusa turn people to stone? Because she does. Because it's a nightmarish, phantasmagoria that you're in, that appears in the labyrinth of the epic, and you have to figure out how to deal with her. And maybe that's by showing her a mirror, by polishing your shield like Perseus did, and showing her her own reflection so that she turns to stone, right? It can be the vanquishing of tyrants. I think that's a very common theme. You see that in Lord of the Rings. You see that in Star Wars, in countless console RPGs. Like I've just been replaying Phantasy Star 1 for the Sega Master System. And that is all about the evil Emperor Lassic rules the Algol star system. They're containing 3 different planets, and you portray the character of Alice, who has to revenge her dead brother who was killed at Lassic's hand and free the solar system from the evil tyranny, right? It could be solving these problems in the other world, very often in Fairyland or in the Labyrinth or in the Descent into the Depths. There are these almost kind of dreamlike problems that must be solved and resolved. You have to trick the Cyclops by saying, "Who am I? I am no man. I am nobody. That's my name. My name is nobody." And fun fact about Odysseus in this is an episode of the Odyssey I'm referring to, in case you didn't know. Fun fact is in Greek, what he says to the Cyclopses when the Cyclopses say, "What's your name?" Odysseus says, "Audus," which means nobody in Greek. So it's a pun. It sounds like Odysseus, and that's part of what's funny about it and fun about it. Okay. So traps, tricks, teleporters, things that confuse you and befuddle you, they're there because they confuse and befuddle you. They may also have their own existence. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the idea that a dungeon should have an ecology to it. I really love that. I think it's better when this world fits together in some sort of cohesive way, because that makes things more interesting. It's a little bit vacuous if the problems are just there waiting for the heroes to solve them. But there's also something to be said for the fact that the other world has problems. And very often, those problems are there to challenge the heroes. In the hero's quest can include finding magical items that do certain things, that solve problems, maybe that they bring back to society, or they use themselves in some special way that can't be solved in other ways. It's why they can get through the other world as mere human beings in this magical world that has laws that are fundamentally against them. It could also be, of course, destroying the evil magic item like Frodo does with the ring, or attempts to. Obviously, it ends up being a little bit different than Frodo expects, but Frodo's goal is to throw it into the volcano. It can be to make a great discovery. And so I think this is like the essence of the treasure hunt epic. Is the treasure hunt epic isn't just about like getting rich, it's about making some sort of discovery, right? So like in Goonies, for instance, the goal of the Goonies is to actually save the town from these developers who just want to buy up all their houses, bulldoze them all down, and build a golf course, and they're just going to have to move. And they don't want to do that. They want to stay together. They want the community. So they're doing it for their community. Also, along the way, they discover things about themselves through discovering things about One-Eyed Willie. So, for instance, I think pretty much most of the characters in Goonies are in some way disabled. Like, Mikey has asthma, right? And so Mikey pulls One-Eyed Willie's patch up, and it turns out that there's no eye there in the skull. There's no eye socket. So it means that One-Eyed Willie was deformed, and he wore an eye patch to cover up his deformity. And they also meet the deformed child of the bad guys, these gangsters, and they find out that, that he's been really mistreated. He was dropped a lot by his mother, and his mother didn't really care about him because she's just this evil gangster. And so they bring him back to, one of the characters is going to bring him back to live with him. And so they discover things about their own disabilities and also the ability to overcome their disabilities by realizing that their hero, One-Eyed Willie, the pirate, was actually deformed and disabled and yet did all these amazing things, right? So that discovery can be part of the treasure hunt. Um, Ultimately, the hero's quest can be self knowledge, um, and it can be about developing your virtues. It can be about going from being, the modest acorn to being the great oak tree, to being in your unvirtuous self, yourself without your virtues, to being more virtuous. Um, Now, you might be saying, well, gee, Ivan, that's none of my TTRPGs. I mean, our TTRPGs where we go into a dungeon and we kick some ass and got some gold and left. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's my TTRPG experience, too. But I'm trying to sort of, describe heroics here and heroic epics here and sort of what TTRPGs can be at their best when they're really, really great. I think it's when we have this heroic experience where, so think like Labyrinth, like Jim Henson's Labyrinth. A lot of the problems, if you rewatch that movie, it's not just a maze. Like, in fact, it's very little of it is just navigating a maze. I mean, Sarah has to navigate the maze, but she tries to like use her lipstick to mark where she's been and stuff like that, and these little critters keep on changing the tiles where she marked, and so the maze is messing with her. The maze has its own consciousness and essence that actually kind of fights back and resists her ability to get through it, and she has to get through it to save her baby stepbrother. And she got into the situation because she asked the Goblin King to take her stepbrother away from her because she it doesn't like the fact that she lost her mother, and her father is now married a stepmother, and the stepmother has a baby with the father, and so she's upset by that as a little girl, but she grows from a little girl into a mature young woman in the course of the movie by having compassion for her baby stepbrother and realizing that she has to solve the problems of the labyrinth in order to rescue him from the Goblin King, who's basically like, we made a deal, I mean, the Goblin King is a complex villain in that story. I don't think he's purely just evil. I mean, he is, but he's not just purely evil. He's kind of like, he's more of a fairy than he is a demon in that sense, that he is this character who is basically like, this is what I do. I'm a ruler of an otherworldly fairyland realm. You made a deal with me. You told me I could take your baby brother and this, your stepbrother, and I don't care if it was at a moment of weakness. I don't care that you were just being a little girl and you need to grow up. We had a deal, and if you're gonna renege on that deal, you have to play my game. And at one point, she confronts him and says, that's not fair. Like, he basically messes with her and says, like, you're kind of getting through the labyrinth too quickly, and I have to mess with her in order to do this. And she says, but that's not fair. And he says, unfair? I wonder what reference you have for that, or something. And it's basically like, yeah, the labyrinth is not a fair place. It's a phantasmagoria full of, these befuddling goblins who mess with the hero's ability to solve the problem she's trying to solve. Some of them well-educated people watching this video may cringe at me invoking Joseph Campbell here with the famous hero's journey and say, oh, there's all these problems academically with Joseph Campbell, and there isn't really one hero's journey. There's lots of different epics and lots of different cultures, and that was a mistake. I'm not contesting that. I'm not an academic. I'm not a professor. I'm not a mythologist. I do think that the concept of the hero's journey is useful. I like Joseph Campbell. You don't have to like Joseph Campbell. You can look at other theories of epics, and that's totally fine. Other theories of mythology and whatnot, and that's totally fine. I'm not here to contest any of that. But I do find that the sort of, kind of the hero's journey concept is a useful way to think about TTRPG heroic campaigns, because you can map it out of you start out in like your hometown or something. That's before you enter the other world. There's the boundary with the guardians, right? There's going into the labyrinth and getting lost in there. That's kind of what the dungeon is. That's what the hex crawl is. Um, there's being lost in the belly of the whale, eaten by the beast. So that is kind of like what the mega dungeon is. Like there's sort of this point of kind of like where you're sort of like so deep in that it's hard to find your way out again. Um, and ultimately there's the confrontation with the evil mother or the evil father. There's the treasure to take back with you to society that means something. And then your return from the other world into the real world. And I think this is where realism anchors things. I think it's good to have some sense of realism, particularly in towns and like civilized regions, so that the PCs can go into the dungeon, go into the Isle of Dread or whatever, go into the Dark Forest or something. They can have that phantasmagoria experience that's less realistic and come back to a more realistic town, country, kingdom, whatever. That kind of anchors them, but still, in all, the places that the adventure can take place in are kind of dreamlike. They're kind of tiptoeing into that fairyland realm where wonders and horrors occur. And although it's nice to have some semblance of order, I think it also is okay to have, these just strange, wondrous, and horrifying things happen in kind of that dreamscape, because you can have these challenges to the heroes that are kind of created in some sense for them, that kind of come out of the challenges of the other world, that are kind of almost there to befuddle and kind of mess with whoever enters them. There's kind of this sense to which the dungeon itself is alive, right? The labyrinth itself is alive. The evil forest or whatever it is kind of alive and has its own sort of nightmarish will, that it is defying anybody who enters them to come out again safely, or to go through them without danger. I'm trying to, kind of push the envelope a little bit and inspire people to make really fun adventures, because I think that adventures are actually more fun when there is this sense of the hero's journey, right? When there is this sense of like, can I be a hero? Can I get through the labyrinth? Can I go through the belly of the beast? Can I confront the Dark Mother or the Dark Father tyrant, the Ogre tyrant, and kind of finally win through to bring the treasure back to my people, to humanity or whatever it is, right? Like there is this really excitement, at least for me when I'm playing, there's like this real excitement. It's not so exciting if it's just, there's some orcs. What do? I swing my sword. Okay, roll your dice. It's something so much more exciting when it's like, it's the orcs of Mordor versus the orcs of Saruman, and they're trying to capture you, and they're trying to get the ring from you, and you need to do what's right and just, or whatever it is that motivates your character, right? And you have some vested interest in doing this, and the excitement of being in a hero's journey. Like, I want to be in a hero's journey. I want my players to experience a hero's journey. So I'm trying to inspire people to have more fun, basically, because I think this is fun. I think this is why we do TTRPGs. And maybe you disagree with me, and that's cool. Say it in the comments and tell me what you disagree about it, and I'm happy to dialogue about this. This is just my take on it, right? Like, I think it's aesthetics, right? There's no one right, true, and only way to enjoy things. So to sum up, I believe that a TTRPG is first and foremost a game of a heroic epic in which players play heroes, not necessarily good guys because they could be kind of dark. I think that TTRPGs are at their best when the GM has a deep knowledge of how a hero's journey works, or how an epic works, what the anatomy and physiology of an epic is, and the sorts of things that can come up in it to present that to their players. And I think that TTRPG is at its best when players bring heroism to the table. And again, not necessarily fighting for justice. I prefer to fight for good and right and justice. I like to play knights and paladins and people like that. Or even to play like wizards who have that same view, that they're good wizards. The good wizard's apprentice who's trying to, save the world. I think that's a great thing to be. But I also kind of understand the fun of playing a kind of roguish, thiefy kind of dark Han Solo type. That could be fun too, but there's still virtues to be had. There's still reasons why you're trying to do it. You can still have self-discovery. You can still have self-transformation. You can change your mind and go from just wanting to pay back Jabba the Hutt to wanting to sacrifice, paying off Jabba the Hutt for the good of the empire of the galaxy, so to bring back the Republic and vanquish the Empire, right? So there's a lot that a Han Solo type can still do that's still the hero's journey. You can just become a more mature person. You can go from, being a little girl who's just spitefully wants her baby stepbrother to be taken by the Goblin King because she's angry that mom died and that, stepmom has come into the family, to being a woman like Sarah does, a young woman who takes responsibility for her actions. There's lots of different ways. It's not necessarily good and evil. But anyway, I hope this has inspired you. I hope you guys liked this and enjoyed this. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'd love to discuss this with people. All right, until next time, happy dreaming, everybody.